This episode is brought to you by Bumble. So, you want to find someone you're compatible with, specifically someone who's ready for a serious connection, totally open to having kids in the future, is a tall, rock-climbing Libra, and loves rom-coms with vegan pizzas on Tuesdays just as much as you do. Bumble knows that you know exactly what's right for you. So whatever it is you're looking for, Bumble's features can help you find it. Date now on Bumble.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Tudors Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson. Well, it's March. It's Women's History Month, and recently I have been reminded that it was not only men who were artists at Tudor court, that there were also some very talented women as well. So with that in mind, I invited back my dear friend, Melanie Taylor, to discuss two female artists at Tudor court, Susannah Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc. Mel, welcome back.
It's a privilege to be with you again, Rebecca. This is great. Looking forward to this one.
I love talking art with you because if you're a first-time listener to the show, Melanie is an art historian. So she has extensive background in artists and pieces of art. And I thought, who better than Melanie to discuss these women? So, Mel, before we even get started today, let's talk a little bit about these two women and what is it about them that has fascinated you so much?
Basically, because they're very little known about, and I love puzzles. And, up until fairly recently, and with women becoming more powerful and doing politics and heading up companies, suddenly women in history are beginning to be looked at, and they're emerging from the shadows. So it's great.
I'm glad. We've talked about this on the show before about how much I like to bring these women out of the shadows of history to discuss them with everybody. Let's talk a little bit about where they came from. Can we do that? And I'll let you start with whichever one you'd prefer to start with. But where did these women come from? Were they English subjects or did they come from somewhere else?
Oh, no. I mean, Susannah, well, both of them come from the Low Countries. And Susannah Horenbout is older than Levina Teerlinc, so we'll start with her. And her family came over in the early 1520s. We're not quite sure who invited them. Recent research has showed it's probably Catherine of Aragon, who, because Susannah's father was valet de chambre and court painter to Margaret of Austria, who, of course, was regent of the Netherlands. And he was granted leave to come to England. And probably Catherine was the one who invited them because she, of course, was brought up as a princess and great patron of the arts. And her she knew about all of those, and she'd had a portrait painted herself. But Susannah is the shadowy figure behind Gerard and her brother Lucas. Lucas and Gerard both worked for Henry, officially. We know that from the accounts. But Susannah, of course, being a woman, would have been able to sit in Catherine's court and paint and draw the Queen and any other woman that was there. And Catherine's court was very, very much women only. Lucas, if he was going to be painting either of them, would have required a chaperone, and there would have had to have been other people there to make sure he didn't do anything naughty.
Mm.
So now it's beginning to be debated that Susannah is the one who's responsible for the portraits of Catherine as queen in the 1520s and Princess Mary. So, it's logical.
Oh, okay. So can we do a reference back right now to the episode with you and Emma, where we discussed a female artist teaching Catherine of Aragon and Mary how to paint? Was that Susannah?
I think it was. So does Emma. We're both convinced that it was. It's a bit like other things that get described in inventories and diaries and documents. A woman artist taught them how to paint, but because women's positions were not really thought of. That's all you get.
Yeah.
So you just have to guess.
Mm,
But
of course.
yeah, Susannah married two men who were part of Henry's household. She married John Parker and then John Gwilym. And in the mid 1520s, she was married, and therefore her status changes. You know, she's a wife, she's a mother, but she's still an artist, and she's probably helping out her brother and her father, but she won't get A, paid, or B, given any credit.
Mm.
Yes.
So what else did she do within Catherine's household? You know, we talk about her being a painter, but what other purpose did she have there?
Um, as far as I know, she's not, and as far as other people have dug down, it's not really known. You know, she might have been a gentlewoman, like Levina was much later. And so she would have had access to anybody, you know, and she would have been around the court, but it was her husband who had the status as a gentleman pensioner. So he would have had his duties. And of course, if she's married to him, she's a wife. So she's got to run the household. They didn't have any kids at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, no kids. But there are various theories, but none of them have actually been proved yet as to what she might have done. It's Lucas who is the central character.
Yeah, I found that interesting when you mentioned her two brothers. Did you say it was brothers?
No, she's got one brother, Lucas.
And the other
Her
one,
father is Gerard, is her father.
I've never heard his name before.
Oh, he's in the art history world of people who study illuminated manuscripts. He's well known because at this point, it's, if you like, it's the dying days of the illuminator, because technology is moving on. You've got printing, you've got books are much cheaper, woodcuts are much cheaper to produce. Anybody can hand color those, and the manuscript or the charter or the treaties are all very select, expensive, and a status symbol, or in the case of a treaty, very necessary to that exchange. And Henry and Francis have a series of treaties which their competition continues. But you know, they're quite, those images are quite well known. But I found one which is a lot in the V&A, and it's the letters patent of Thomas Forster, who is Henry's embroiderer. So if you think of Henry's amazing costumes and all of that embroidery, that's who it was, who did all of that amazing work, or the people he employed, which of course could be women, but they wouldn't ever be named. And he would have employed the Horenbout family, not Henry. Forster would have employed the Horenbout family to illuminate this charter, which was great because he was given properties in the city of London by the king as a recognition of his talents, and he would have got the rents from them. So instead of just being paid money, he was given if you like, a stipend from properties owned by the crown. But I'll send you some images so you can slot them in, and you can see that it's the start of the portrait miniature of the king. And you have to remember, these are only about an inch across portraits. So they are tiny. But it's the edge of the pattern, which is lovely. But when it comes to Susannah's work, it's far, far more difficult to pin down. But she is important.
Yeah, most definitely. And of course, my mind goes in weird places when I'm thinking about them doing these miniatures. And I know I'm probably veering off topic just a little bit here, but when they're doing these miniatures, how on earth are they? Do they have a magnifying glass? You know, like how how good are their eyes in order to make these tiny images?
Well, we know from a portrait of Levina's father that he wore specs.
Okay. Okay. See, that's probably because he was straining his eyes all the
He was
time.
straining his eyes. He had eye strain, and there's two versions of that. And one's in the Met in New York, and one eye is looking a bit weird, and I do wonder whether he had a monocle. So because it looks as though it's been
Oh,
pushed open. So it's why
interesting.
were there two versions of that particular image? Probably because he had two daughters.
Huh.
Victoria was one, and Levina was the other. But the miniatures also carried messages.
Hmm.
I mean, they could be love tokens. And what's more, they're a lot cheaper than the big portraits. It's about £2 or £3, about £2,000 or £3,000 in today's money. But
Wow.
and they were held in the hand. So you could have a private conversation with someone and sort of say, this is my secret lover. Or in the case of Catherine, there's a lovely one in the Baclue collection where she's got this monkey. We're back to pets, Rebecca.
Yes. Yeah. And this monkey again.
It's the monkey. And, this is the monkey with the chain round his waist. And is that Henry? Is she going to show it to any particular woman who thinks, right, Queen's getting a bit old now, so I'm going to have a chance at the main man?
Yeah.
Possibly. But just to be shown that, they'd get the message. My husband is a lusty fellow, because monkeys are signifiers of lust in the medieval bestiaries. But he's
Yeah.
chained to me by marriage. So go on, hop into bed with him, but I'm going to be queen. it's just a quiet way of saying, lady, get lost.
Right. Because we're
Come
saying
on.
this was the 1520s. So anybody who
Yeah.
studied the Tudors for any amount of time knows that was the Anne Boleyn time.
Oh, yeah. Now there. Her court was very, very different. And by the way, she hated monkeys.
Uh,
She had a real thing against monkeys, but you
Well-
can imagine why.
I was just going to say, was that because they were used as a message against her?
Well, there is the obvious thing that this is Queen Catherine with her pet, and it's on a chain because it was scampering all over the place and whipping off those gable hoods and pulling people's caps off and then jumping up into the rafters and sort of sitting there chattering and then pulling the feathers apart or ripping off the jewels. I mean, they must have been a nightmare.
Yeah, it was like having a toddler in the room who had no parent watching them.
And that could climb.
Yes, yes. Very important part right there. They could climb. Okay, so we have discovered that Susannah came in the 1520s. When did Levina come to Tudor court?
Well, can we just roll back a bit about
Sure.
Susannah? She plays quite an important part in the entourage sent to pick up Anna of Cleves.
Lavina?
No.
We're still on
Susannah.
Susannah. Sorry, I
Thomas-
took us.
Yes, it's all right. John Parker dies and she marries John Gwilym in 1539. And 3 weeks after her marriage, Thomas Cromwell says to her, I want you to go with everybody to pick up Anna and bring her back to England. And I'm going to give you £40 to go out and get a new wardrobe. That's the straight inflation rate. That's 16,000 quid to go and spend on clothes.
Oh, let's pick out an outfit.
Somebody, I'd love that.
Yes.
She was, her English was not her first language, and she would be able to sit there and listen to the German and the dialects and be able to report back what was being said in the very enclosed court that Anna was part of, which of course other people couldn't do. So this leads on to how much of it was was a painter, either a man or a woman, able to spy?
Right.
Because if you're going to have your portrait painted, it's not a public event. And you get a very close rapport with the person who is painting your portrait, and you build a relationship, and you might let something slip. And in that particular instance, Susannah would be able to tell Thomas and the rest of the court what was going on in the Cleves court and what they thought about the marriage, because it's, Latin was the language of court talk, and not everybody spoke German.
Right.
But
Right.
she did.
Do we know if they knew that she spoke German?
Well, certainly Thomas did.
Yeah. But did the Cleves
Sure,
crew?
we know that Anna didn't speak English. So that the cover story would have been Susannah was there to teach her English because she spoke German.
Smart.
Yeah.
Very smart.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Do we have an image that she painted of Anne of Cleves?
No,
That's too bad.
that's too bad. We don't, but we do. There's a Holbein oil on panel, which is about 4 inches across, in Vienna, which might be of Susannah. So that makes the link. The only thing is, it says that she was 28 in 1534. Well, there's a debate about this now. So it's quite possibly just another woman who's married to a gentleman pensioner who just happens to be wearing the same clothes that Susannah would have worn. So who knows? But she comes back to England, and she has children, and she's a happy wife and mum, and she may have painted the Yale miniature, which is much debated. Is it Lady Jane Grey? Is it Princess Elizabeth? Is it Princess Mary? I believe it's Amy Robsart, but you can find that one on my website. I'm not sending you that one.
I'll share a link for everybody.
And there is this is the time, of course, where you've got the sweating sickness that comes through. And she survives, but in 1544, her brother Lucas contracts the sweating sickness, and he dies 6 months after Hans Holbein. So suddenly Henry's court does not have either a professional illuminator or a professional painter of big portraits.
Interesting. I don't think we ever hear about that.
No, because, well, art historians know about it.
Right. The rest of us haven't heard about it.
Yeah, no. So,
maybe...
the word goes out, I need an illuminator. I need a new official court artist. And again, Margaret of Austria's court is raided. And William Scrotts comes across, and he's the guy who paints the big portraits. And we know from the accounts that Levina Teerlinc, whose surname is Benning, her maiden name is Benning, appears in the accounts of 1546. Now, I've got new research coming out soon that shows that her work was known about. So it might have been a direct recruitment. In which case, Levina was appointed as the first woman official artist in the whole of Europe.
That's amazing.
Now, that's pretty radical in any court. So, all the theories about, was it Catherine Parr or invited her, and hopefully will be set to all that speculation will be set, if you like, calmed down, and it'll be interesting.
Yeah, most definitely.
But she was I mean, one of the first things she had to do was to produce a treaty for Henry, the Peace of Ardres of 1546. And that is in the French archives, because of course they were exchanged. And she's introduced a completely new idea for treaties. And this one, Henry wins. The Battle of the Treaties. Who produces the best one? Is it Francis? He won that battle in 1527. Or, in this case, it's Henry, because he's got Levina, and she's recognized as coming from the third generation, going back to Hugo van der Goes and Roger van der Weyden and Van Eyck, who were the big names in the 15th century. They were direct links, and she's the third generation of the Bennings. She's the last as well, because, you know, printing's taken over.
This is okay. So you make it sound like it was a competition on who could produce the best looking one. Was it really like that?
It was. It was. I mean,
Wow.
the 1527 English treaty that's in Paris, which was produced by the Horenbout, whether it was Lucas, Susannah, or their father Gerard, is in pretty poor state. It's almost as if the French took one look at it and went, "Oh God, that's dreadful. Oh," and threw it in the corner where it got trampled on, probably trodden on. Whereas we looked at the one which the French sent across, which has got a portrait of Francis with his huge great nose and looking very regal, and this beautiful surrounding gold, and it's printed. It's printed on very high class vellum, and so Francis won that. Oh, and the seal, which is solid gold, is bigger than the solid gold seal that was on the the one we sent to France. So we did come out of that one looking a bit mean on gold, and the French didn't like our paintings. It was as simple as that.
I think it's so easy for us to forget as we study Tudor history that there was so much more than just these relationships between people, that there were these maybe what we would perceive as hidden things that show power one way or another. And this is blowing my mind today.
Oh, the treaties were one way of doing it, definitely.
Yeah.
And you know, Levina's there in 1546, and then of course Henry dies at the beginning of 1547. She's being paid £40 a year, which is £7 more than either Holbein or Lucas was paid. But it's at the king's pleasure. So when Henry dies, what's going to happen? Is that going to continue? It does. And we know that Princess Elizabeth, during Edward's reign, sends a portrait in little of herself to Edward. Princess Mary, as we know, is a grown woman and has her own court and is, you know, sitting there quietly being Mary. Now, that portrait of Elizabeth could be in the Royal Collections Trust. And they think it's fairly certain that it is of Elizabeth and it is by Teerlinc, but again, it's an attributed to, which is code for we're not quite sure. So that's a modern day coding.
Interesting. I think I always assumed when there was the discussion of Elizabeth sending a portrait to her brother that it was the one where she's wearing that reddish pink dress.
No.
It's not
That's
that one.
big, but no, that reddish pink dress is a big portrait by William Scrotts.
Okay.
And that is hanging in Windsor Castle in the Queen's sitting room. So when you come over in June, we're going to have to go around Windsor Castle so that you can see all of these paintings.
No, I don't think I want to go to Windsor.
You know? Okay, right, fine.
Just kidding.
Suit yourself.
Well, that's really interesting. I feel like when I have you on the show, I always learn more about art history than what we get at the surface level on the internet or sometimes in books even.
Well, this is a time, particularly when it comes to women artists, that they're shadowy figures, and that goes right the way up to now. I mean, you ask anybody, name 5 women artists, and they'll be pushed. They'll be able to do the Rachel White Reeds, and various. That's modern. She's modern. She's still alive. Rachel White Reed,
Okay.
Sarah Lucas. She's still alive. They'll be able to do Artemisia Gentileschi because she's been all over the news. But anybody else, they'll have difficulty with. They'll know the big names like Holbein
Yeah.
and Turner, but it's it's difficult. It's only nerds like me that really get geeky about the whole thing. So with Edward's reign, I'm still digging in there. So I think she did the Treaty of Boulogne, but I'm still looking at that, and that has a portrait of a very young Edward, and it's literally half an inch tall within the letter. I mean, it's tiny, as you say, glasses, magnifying glass.
Yes.
And think of the weather. Think how dark it is in winter, especially in England, because we're so much further north than you are. You've got candlelight. The best time to paint is in the summer because the weather's better. It's not going to snow. It's not going to rain. Well, you hope it's not going to snow. So you've got a limited period of the year when you can actually paint. So it's all of these outside factors. And when Edward dies and you have all of that problem of Mary coming to the throne and Jane Grey and Northumberland, Levina's the one who has to portray Mary on the Queen's Bench front sheet. And she does that, but it's unfinished, which is a shame because it's a lovely little painting. But again, that is probably 2 inches high. And it shows angels bringing her to the throne. You see her seated on the throne in the middle with the holy dove above her under a cloth of estate and angels either side of her with these banners, which would have had words in, except that's the missing bit. And on the other side, you've got Northumberland and this army in the background, and they're throwing down their weapons and sort of saying, okay, I surrender. So it tells the story of Northumberland's attempt to to oust Mary, but how by divine right, she took the throne and angels helped her.
Oh, and this is all within a 2-inch portrait.
2-inch, maybe 2.5-inch height. It's a
Wow.
long time since I actually looked at that at Kew because it's a lovely piece.
How
But
does how does somebody learn to paint like that?
practice.
You have to have special tools, I would assume. You can't just use a standard brush. You'd have to use
Nope.
something.
No, I mean, a big brush would be 2 or 3 hairs wide,
Okay.
and it would be squirrel.
Oh.
And they're bound onto a piece of wood with wax and thread. So you might have one which has maybe got 5 hairs on it, and that's a really big brush. But for the very, very detailed work, you're talking 1 or 2. So it's doing it and painting it, let alone conceiving of that whole narrative.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a go, and no, it's difficult.
Well, you would definitely need to have a steady hand in order to do this.
Oh, definitely. That would, you can rest your arm on something to stop it jiggling about, but you certainly couldn't do it sort of if you're tired or if you've been partying too much the night before.
They didn't do that at Tudor court.
Oh, don't forget, they drank small beer. So 1% to kill off all the bugs.
Yeah, there you go.
Which, but when Mary comes to the throne, there's a problem. There's a big problem. How do you portray a queen? We've never had a queen.
True.
Yeah. And on the seals and, on charters, it's always been a king, either as a warrior. It's difficult for a woman.
Mm.
One side, it's great. You can put her on the throne and you can show her like that. But as a warrior, that's impossible. So Levina, it takes a woman to solve it, doesn't it?
Of course it does.
Of course it does. And Levina is credited with creating the first great seal for Mary. And when she marries Philip, that one as well.
Oh. So, okay. I'm trying to get some time frames here. Susannah.
1554.
So Susannah was at the beginning part of the Tudor dynasty, and Levina would have been more toward the middle and the end.
And the middle and the end, and they overlap because Susannah dies, we think, in 1554. It's where she disappears from any records.
Oh.
And by then she had 3 kids, and she'd been John Gwillim's second wife. So he had lots of children, but she just disappears. And then Levina continues. And one of the first things she has to do for Mary is to produce a new order of service for the Good Friday blessing of the cramp rings. And she illuminates this, and she has 2 full pages showing Mary as queen blessing the cramp rings and then curing the king's evil. Because only the English monarchs, and the French, could cure the king's evil.
Can you, I think I need you to clarify a little bit for the listeners what a cramp ring is. It's not for cramps.
Well, it's well, it is and it isn't. The cramp ring was given to help cure various ailments. And if you were suffering from the king's evil, which was in fact a form of tuberculosis of the lymph nodes, you were given, after you'd had the queen's hands laid on you, which of course would cure you, you'd be given a cramp ring. I'm still trying to get my head around these cramp rings because it's not just the queen who does these. You find them in Roman history as well. There are cramp rings right the way through. And it's a way of, if you like, taking a spiritual essence, putting it into a ring, and that will help cure whatever it is that you're suffering from.
Oh, it's like the magnetic bracelets that you see sold these days.
That's it. Yep.
So it's a magic ring.
It's a magic ring. It's a magic ring. But the cramp ring prayer book has survived. It survived civil wars. It survived iconoclasm. It's World War II. It's still there, and it's a treasure of Westminster Cathedral, which is the Roman Catholic thing. It's wonderful. It's and I've had the pleasure of actually looking at it and photographing it.
How large is that one?
The illuminations are about 6 by 4.5 inches.
Okay.
Then they've got lovely decorations all the way around, and you've got where she's kneeling and putting her hands, and of course the hands are emphasized, so it looks as though she's got hands which are about this big. And they're emphasized to show that it's her touch that's doing this. But above that, there is an hourglass which is lying on its side, and at the bottom there's a skull, so time has been suspended, and that is showing you that it doesn't matter whether it's Mary or whoever's on the throne, this is the monarch who will cure you and make you better from this awful disease, which was very disfiguring, but also very prevalent.
I love all the hidden messages.
Oh, there's lots of those.
So it's easy for me to look at a painting, any painting, a portrait or a scene or whatever it is, and just look at it from 100 yards away. I don't know how else to describe it. I look at it in a much more superficial way than, say, you would, you know?
Yeah, 18 years of digging around in medieval bestiaries and everything. Well, we're actually the generation where we're most image conscious. I mean, you've got Henry, whose mouth is crossed over in the background of your there, you know, behind you. And yes, he looks regal and quite amazing. I think that's a wonderful portrait of him. Is that AI?
I think it is, yes.
Yeah, right. And there you go. There he is. But from, you know, that's taken, you can see from his jewels, his wealth and status, and the rubies are for sacrifice because they're blood red, and the sapphire represents heaven, and diamonds are for constancy. All of this is in the bestiaries, by the way. And then you have the flowers in the margins, and if they've got 5 petals, that's the 5 wounds of Christ. And if there are 3 of them, that could represent the Trinity. So you've got the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. So it's like peeling back an onion.
It really is.
Yeah. And when you get in after, if you like, the Civil War and Charles II's back on the throne, the miniature art goes on through to the 1800s, because people still want to have portraits of their loved ones. And then along comes photography in 1839, and that's it. Kills it stone dead. On your phone, do you have photographs of your family and loved ones?
Yes, of course.
That's like having a portrait miniature. You select who you show it to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, except for nowadays we've got social media, so everybody puts up photographs of their loved ones on TikTok and Facebook, and I don't, because I don't know how to work it.
I always think, when I think of the miniatures, I go back to my Thomas Seymour research and how he thanks Catherine Parr for the miniature that she sent, or she was going to send. I might have it incorrect there. And I'd like to imagine him having this miniature of her, pulling it out occasionally, taking a peek at her.
And where is it now? That's the big question.
Yeah, or exactly which one was it, because there was no specification as to who painted it or anything. It could have been, I mean, there is that one.
Susannah. It could have been Susannah. It could have been Lucas's wife, Margaret Hazelweather, who, there's a new name for you.
Yes.
And they had a daughter called Jacintha. And she too was a painter.
Would that have fit with the 1540s timeline, though?
Yeah. But the problem with that is that they didn't do any court work. So we don't know whether or not, you know, if there is, or so far, nothing has appeared in any accounts or inventories. And it's the documents which will prove or disprove any of these theories. Now, there is a possibility of, I know that Emma's found a name in the 1510s, which she's busy trying to track down, which would be interesting, because that's possibly another woman. But again, there's only one mention, and we don't know any work. But that was at the point where there was no illuminator, because the scribe and illuminator, Quentin Powlett, I think his name was Quentin Powlett, or Poulet, but the English, not being able to speak French, call him Powlett. He is Poulet. He died in 1506. So who was doing the illuminating of the documents and the treaties and everything else that was needed. We just don't know. But when it's Levina, she's so far, where we've got up to, she's now doing Mary.
Mm.
Mary dies in 1558, and she goes on to serve Elizabeth. And she's still being paid £40 a year at the monarch's pleasure, should we call it?
Sure.
And at the beginning of Elizabeth's reign, under Mary's will, it says, please pay all my debts. And in the accounts, there is a payment to Levina Teerlinc's husband on behalf of Teerlinc, which shows that right the way through Mary's reign, she didn't get paid.
What?
Paid a lump sum of £150, which is for the time that she didn't get paid.
So is
And
was she just
at court.
working on credit?
Yep.
Okay.
She was doing it pro bono. And right underneath that is Robert Brandon, who was the Queen's goldsmith. And he is paid £1,500, which is the equivalent of several million nowadays.
Wow.
And you're thinking, so he was obviously lending money or doing work and not being paid for it. So was Mary a bit flaky on paying her bills?
She wasn't like her grandfather, huh?
No. Or as parsimonious as her half sister Elizabeth. So Elizabeth she's different. She's, she uses Teerlinc to illuminate the indenture for the poor knights of Windsor, which was something that Henry wanted done. So Elizabeth fulfills something under Henry's will, but it's a slightly different style. It's not as flowery as the Crampring manuscript. And there are various other things which she may or may not have done. Again, it's question mark. And she's getting older. Do we know what she looks like? Yes, we do. That was my coup back in 2006 when I did my master's. There is an unknown lady, dated 1572, by Nicholas Hilliard, up in the Buccleuch collection. And my examiners accepted that, yes, I'd proved the point. This was Levina Teerlinc. Well, that gave us a date of birth, 1520, same year as William Cecil.
Wow.
So they were contemporaries. And you think, okay, why would she get Hilliard to paint her portrait? Well, the Queen was notoriously vain, and she did not like to be reminded that she was aging.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1572, she was just 39, wasn't she? So nobody likes to be told that actually you're getting to the point where you're a bit over the hill, Queenie.
Oh, I'd say bite me.
And Levina was probably another one who could sit there and just quietly absorb everything that was going on around her. And did she pass on snippets of conversation to the Queen herself? Did she pass them on to William Cecil? Did she pass them on to Francis Walsingham? It's possible. We know that she did in fact, quite a few of the P's on the front of the Queen's Bench proceedings. But 1576, in the June, she dies.
1576. Okay.
So she was only 56, but that was old age.
Right.
According to things. So was this portrait that she did of, that Hilliard did of her in 1572, was that her quiet way of saying, I found you a successor to replace me. I'm getting on a bit. My eyes hurt. And you'll like him because he's pretty cute.
Where is the cute message in this?
I'll send you a photograph of the miniature, which is in the V&A. Oh yeah, he's cute. Aidan Turner, have you seen the Poldark series?
I have not. I'm familiar with it. I think I've seen the
All
the
right.
sneak peeks, but I've never watched it.
Oh well. If ever a film was ever to be made of my novel Truth of the Line, which is all about Hilliard's relationship with Elizabeth and weaves in Levina's story, as I see it, when you see this miniature, you'll understand what I mean about he's cute. And I'd like Aidan Turner to play him because, yeah, they're like two peas in a pod.
Oh, I love it. I love that so much.
But Teerlinc was given a lifetime annuity in 1559 by Elizabeth for her loyalty to the Tudor family.
Rightfully so.
And she'd been there since 1546, 1559. She's been there 13 years. Had she been quietly passing messages up to, between Elizabeth and other members of the court? Don't know.
I think this is so fascinating how these women, I'd never looked at them this way before. They were so much more than artists.
Oh, they were strong women.
Yeah, they were a very important part of court.
And everybody, but that's not just the artists, that's every woman. And the film, Charles Laughton film, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, which was, I think, 1933, it's black and white.
Yeah.
You look at the way that the various six wives, if you like, manipulate him. And in England, women in 1933 were still regarded as chattels. It wasn't until 1974, Matrimonial Causes Act, section, I think it was 19, blah, blah, blah. That suddenly women were independent and recognized as people as their own right. It's, it's it's less than 100 years since that film. And 1974, it's 50 years that women have actually had the right. We had the vote, but when it came to other things, when it came to marriage, we were still regarded as a chattel.
I think it's hard for us who didn't grow up with that to understand not only what it was like 50 plus years ago, but centuries ago to be a woman, because we do have more freedoms now. Our voices are heard more than they were now. It's still not perfect.
Well, it's still not perfect by any measure.
But it was a different game. Women were just as smart back then. They were just as cunning, I think.
But they went about it in a different way. Now
Yes.
we just say, right, I'm not doing that. The law says I don't have to do it. Go away. Shut off. I'm going to divorce you. No. But back in 1933, no. I mean, and that film is a great way of showing young girls nowadays as to what women in England went through. But then you have people, women who actually were in Parliament, like Lady Astor, who used to spar quite well with Winston Churchill. She was quite a character. But again, these people had their portraits painted. They want to be immortalized in paint, not just cameras. So, what is the art form? Is it the paint? Is it the photograph? Is it the document or the legacy that you leave behind?
Speaking of legacies, I think this is the perfect opportunity. I know you could talk about these two women all day with me, but I think this is the perfect opportunity to wrap it up a little bit. And I would love to hear what you think the legacy of these two amazing women should be.
I think that's just emerging. The more we do research, the more documents that we find, the more that attributions can be given to the work that they did, the big one is going to be Susannah, because of the fact that she's so overshadowed by her brother Lucas. When it comes to Teerlinc, watch this space.
Something's coming.
Something's coming.
Dun, dun, dun.
Da, da, da.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for joining me again today to discuss Susannah Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc. This was such
Benning.
Nay Benning. This was such a fun discussion, and I really hope this gets the listeners to do their own digging to learn more about these women and other female artists in history.
I hope so too. Women artists is one of my pet subjects. I lecture on it and do all sorts of stuff. But yeah, they deserve a voice. They deserve a voice.
Thank you, Melanie.
And thank you for having me.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.